Chapter 4, verse 157, which we just talked about in the earlier episode, refers to the fact that Jesus did not die, that someone else must have died in his place. And this has always been a bone of contention for Muslims for hundreds and hundreds of years. Of course, they said there was no crucifixion, that Jesus never died because whenever I ask Muslims why that's so important, it's because, well, they have to say it's important because the Qur'an says so. They don't really understand the reason behind it. Some Muslims try to come up with the notion, well, maybe it's because God was not able to protect Jesus, and that shows the weakness of God. Without thinking through, if you're going to throw out the crucifixion, you're going to throw out all of history. There are 5 problems I have with that idea that Jesus did not die. If Jesus did not die, then even though the Quran intimates it in chapter 4, verse 157, what are you going to do with chapter 19, verse 33, Surah 19, ayah 33, which says very clearly, referring to Jesus himself, Isa, who's saying as a child, "Blessed be me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I rise again." So if he did not die, what is Jesus saying that he did die and he's going to rise again? Even Isa claims that he was going to do that. And remember, he's a little child. He's talking about the future. So this is not a future rendering for another time, a second coming of Isa. This is for that time as well. If you want to say it's a future rendering, then what are you going to do with verse 15 of chapter 19, where John the Baptist, Yaxya, says the same thing about him. Blessed be him, the day he was born, the day he dies, and the day he rises again. So you cannot have it both ways. Chapter 3, verse 55 in the Quran, Surah 3, ayah 55, Allah is saying to Muhammad, I will mutawafika. Mutawafika means I will cause you to die. It does not mean put you to sleep. No Arab speaker or Arab scholar will allow you to use that translation. That means I will cause you to die. Very clear in the Arabic. That confronts chapter 4, verse 157. That also confronts and also agrees with chapter 19, verse 33. So we have the problem with the internal problems. You have the difficulty, as I said in the earlier segment, of the contradiction, the theological contradiction between chapter 6, verse 164 and chapter 53, verse 38 of the Quran, which says no one can take on the price of another. No one can take on the guilt of another. Then what about the man that was on the cross who did take on the guilt of Isa? You got that problem. Thirdly, what about the historical context? There is no historian in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th century up to the 6th or 7th century that talks about anybody else that was crucified. We don't know of any historian that says that, and here the Quran comes around in the 7th century and said it wasn't Jesus. Look at Thales, who is a Greek historian, who talks about that not only the time that when he died, that the earth shook and the sun went dark, but you have Tacitus, who hated Christians. He was a Roman historian. He talked about the death of Jesus and mentioned that it happened under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. That's why we know it happened in 33 AD. And then you've got Josephus, a Jewish historian, who not only talks about the death, but also interestingly mentions that the Christians believe he rose again. The only extra biblical reference to the resurrection. So here you have a Greek, Roman, and Jewish historian, all three stipulating that Jesus died. And what about the eyewitness account? Shouldn't we go to the eyewitnesses? Weren't there people there that actually wrote about it? Wasn't John at the foot of the cross? Didn't John know Jesus for 3 years? Don't you think he would have known who was on the cross? Don't you think he would have recognized who was on the cross? What about the mother of Jesus? She was at the foot of the cross. Don't you think a mother would have known her own son? And what about the man on the cross? Don't you think he would have said something? You got the wrong guy. For goodness sakes, think through the implications of what you Muslims are saying. That man would have said something. And look what that man did say. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Does that sound like a misguided man? An innocent man? Sorry, he was an innocent man, but a man who shouldn't have been on the cross? Into your hands I commend my spirit. That's the last thing Jesus said on the cross. That doesn't sound like the wrong man. But then we get to the worst part, the hardest one for me to understand. If Jesus did not die on the cross, then you've got a problem here, because that means Jesus, 3 days later, up on Sunday evening, he goes up in the upper room, introduces himself to the disciples, and claimed it was he. Does any prophet lie like that? A week later, when Thomas even questioned him, he showed the holes in his hands and showed the holes in his feet, proving that it was he. No prophet that I know would lie like that. And then what about the God of Islam? If you're saying that he took the image of Jesus, put it on another man, and that man died in the place of Jesus, and then Allah did not tell anybody for 600 years. It took him 600 years to find. He said, "Ooh, baby, let me get this straightened out. Let me go tell this prophet who cannot read or write the real truth." That's the kind of God you serve? Is that the God really that you're talking about? That I want nothing to do with that God. Thank God I don't follow Allah. Thank God my Bible all points to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Right through all the way through Scripture, you will find this intimated and then finding fulfilled in all four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All the disciples died for that event. And all of us, everyone, is saved because of that event. Yes, Jesus did die. But don't leave him dead. He then rose 3 days later for you and for me. God bless you. J. Smith, over and out.